Hi, I'm Schadt, CEO of DoubleHorn. Today I'm joined by Mark Stavrou, CEO of Trustgrid.io. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing great.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're going to talk about Trustgrid, converged, and hybrid computing today. Before we get there, though, tell us about your journey and how you ended up as the CEO of Trustgrid.
Yeah, happy to. Well, Tab, I think any of this starts when you're younger.
Yeah.
And I remember a lot of this foundation was laid by my dad. So my dad is a World War II vet. He was a fighter pilot.
Wow.
He was drafted in 1944, right where we were getting ready to end the war. And in those days, you found out you were drafted by looking at the front page of the newspaper.
Yeah.
So we actually still have the front page of the Washington Post. I'm a DC native, where his name,
literally his name,
the name of 5 or 6 other people at that time were in the paper. So you picked up the paper, and if your name was there, you reported. So my dad was already a pilot by the age of 16.
Okay.
So he was able to move into flight school there. But I remember my dad, when he got out on the original GI Bill, was extremely entrepreneurial. And so as kids, we kind of learned that. We learned that the path to his success was a path to be entrepreneurial and found companies. So that really started there. Ended up attending University of Maryland, getting my master's in business after an undergraduate pre-med program. And when I got out of that, I thought I was going to go into biotech and work for a large biotechnology company, maybe someday start my own business. And then the internet happened. So that was, for me, about 93, 94. I'd been really interested in information security and the internet itself. And so I was the guy that knew something about security. So I ended up getting hired as the product manager for internet security at PSINet, which is one of the largest ISPs of the day. And we built out a product suite of managed security services where we had internet data center-based components and then customer on-prem-based components. Okay. We had to connect those and deliver them as a managed service. Yeah. So we really started seeing the complexity of networks at that point. Followed a management team to 3 different other people's startups. One was Genuity, which was a division of Bechtel building out internet infrastructure. Then we moved to Global Center, which was an early hoster of Yahoo and some of the other web properties. And then finally to Equinix, where I was employee 38. Now it's a $14 or $15 billion global company.
Where were they in revs when you joined?
Pre-IPO and a couple $100,000 of annual recurring revenue. So really small.
Wow.
We raised, I think, $900 million, $400 in private, and about $500 in the IPO.
And the rest is history. Yeah.
And the rest is history. Yeah. But the theme there is you have data center-based services at the time. There wasn't really cloud. And very, very complex on-premise environments, and also very, very high-growth entrepreneurial environments. So all of those things were a very, very common theme that converged to really help prepare me for the Trustgrid side.
Yep. So let's jump into Trustgrid.
Yeah.
What's the vision?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So, the vision is sort of a combination of the 3 founders, and all of them brought unique capabilities. One of our co-founders worked for a large networking company where he was building one of the largest cloud-based security products in the world. And they were pulling in information all to the centralized cloud environment and then shipping that information scrubbed back out to the customers. But what they found is that without a compute component at the customer sites, it made it very, very difficult to make money because their cloud costs were extreme. So they had a single centralized cloud component. One of my other co-founders built a large VAR here in Central Texas, so he had to operationalize all this technology. Yeah. And that becomes really, really difficult because of the complexity of the solutions, and some are very, very vendor-driven. For myself, I'm the guy that had to sell stuff. So we had to make it real for a customer in terms of delivered business value. So the vision of Trustgrid really came about when we're talking to CIOs and CTOs that are running hybrid cloud-based applications that have to connect those applications to other hybrid cloud components, but also massively to data sources that cannot live adjacent to the hybrid cloud application.
Okay.
So when we started talking to these CIOs and CTOs that had to connect these cloud applications to other hybrid cloud environments and distributed data sources, what they were telling us is they were using the same technologies that I was using in 1995 to connect to those data sources. So hardware-based VPNs, next-generation firewalls that were simply being used as routers, in some cases just circuits themselves. And they faced this massive complexity, cost, difficulty in managing them, and when they were moving assets into hybrid cloud environments, these sort of legacy WAN connectivity methods did not connect very well. So they had these compelling events around cloud and hybrid cloud, and they said, how are we going to connect these things? How are we going to manage them? And how are we going to do it at a scale that reduces complexity and lowers costs and gives us increased security and compliance? So that was the vision.
Okay.
That vision of hybrid cloud it extends beyond connectivity. So whereas the first thing customers want to say is, we've got to connect our private cloud environment to this new public cloud environment or a multi-public cloud environment, and maybe some legacy assets on-prem on our own metal. But then we've got to connect to these on-prem client components, but we also want to decide what components of our application need to run where.
Okay.
So hybrid cloud to us is cloud everywhere.
Right.
You know,
right.
again, back in the 90s, we had internet data centers that were running software that by today's standards is really not very smart. The cloud is all about software and automation and better processes. And all of those technologies exist in hybrid cloud environments. In our view of the world, we want to be able to leverage that automation and that software at the edge of those networks as well.
Okay. So what's the landscape look like in terms of other Trustgrids and from a competitive standpoint? I mean,
Sure.
what do you find from a segmentation? Because I'm sure that's a big piece of...
It's a significant issue, and I
yeah.
think that this we're not unique in finding this problem. So
Yeah, right. That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
In my research, there was quite a few firms, but you guys definitely have a honed-in strategy that it looks like, but you still got to be aware of the competitors.
Yeah, that's clearly the case. So it is a big space. Yeah. The single biggest competitor is do nothing, right? Is maintain a legacy course for customers. But many of the large networking providers are continuing to push their hardware-based solutions, and they make sense in many cases. There's a significant amount of movement in the software-defined WAN space.
Right.
So there's a 38 or 39 software-defined WAN competitors in the space, which are viable options. There are pure play kind of software-defined networking solutions. So there's really broad-based competition in a very, very, very large market.
Yeah.
The way that we've differentiated ourselves is really in two pieces. The first is our hybrid cloud applications for our sweet spot customer have to connect to many other companies' networks.
Okay.
So we call this a multi-stakeholder environment.
Right.
So I may be connecting a digital banking application to 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 different banks. That represents a level of solution complexity that is extremely significant.
Right.
And so we have figured out how to do that very, very well, how to connect those sort of heterogeneous environments and deal with complexity really, really well. The second piece is we're more than a connectivity platform. We view the hybrid cloud environment as a platform of connectivity, but also application management.
Okay.
So the first problem I have is I got to have security, I got to have connectivity, I got to have compliance. I need to solve these problems today. They're line item budgeted, they're top of mind for CIOs. But how do I do it in a software-defined way? Whereas if I deploy a platform, now in the future, I can start deciding, I've got the platform deployed, I've got my connectivity in place, what elements of my application am I going to distribute to many of these edge locations so that it can run more efficiently and more effectively? Right. So many of the data sources that our customers connect to can't move into the cloud or into hybrid cloud environments with it due to security or regulatory compliance or just socio-political issues. You can't have my data.
Right.
In some cases, an MRI machine is never moving to the cloud. An IoT device producing data at the edge of the network is not moving into the cloud. A core banking system running in a bank branch is not moving into the cloud. Right. So how do I manage this complexity? We differentiate by providing that connectivity and then providing that future optionality so we can push those application components out and run them at the edge where it makes sense.
When you talk about that, one of the things going through my head is the human capital piece of this and the skill sets required. I mean, you just crossed a couple chasms going from legacy 2-3 decades back, data center, private cloud, legacy application into some pretty forward-thinking technology. Yeah. How do you handle that?
Yeah, you know, Travis, that's a fantastic question because ultimately it's all about the people. The people make it work.
Exactly.
You know, we introduce complexity with technology, but people introduce much of the complexity.
I would agree.
And so, that sort of, it's a really interesting challenge because that legacy component where you have individuals with legacy skill sets that may feel threatened by innovation, and they're going to protect their domains, especially in large, complex enterprise environments. But that person who is experiencing that sort of push and going, Are my skill sets going to be relevant? What does my job path look like? Am I going to get fired? Should I be resisting change or embracing it?
Right.
And there's uncertainty, and obviously we've all experienced that, that feeling one point or another in our career. But that person is feeling the same thing that the innovator is feeling.
Yes.
They're pushing, they're going, look, my skill sets are interesting and new. I'm pushing an innovative approach. Will it be accepted?
Yeah.
Will this disruption result in me not being relevant?
Right.
So those people are feeling the same things, and it hasn't changed in the last 25 years.
No, it's not. People will always be the most complicated piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, no doubt.
So let's talk a little bit more about your company before we transfer into kind of growth and some leadership questions. What does Trustgrid right now have a preferred profile customer? Have you got down to that piece, or right now it's more about addressing the solution and you're indifferent of the industry or size?
Yeah, no, there is a clear set of attributes to a customer that makes the most sense for Trustgrid. So first, we're in highly regulated industries.
Okay.
And they have significant security and compliance components. So think banking, think healthcare, retail, payments. Those types of companies have a need to connect broadly to kind of real-time, secure transactional data sources, data that's coming from everywhere, and systems that may be distributed everywhere. So there's a sort of a regulatory component.
Right.
The next component is they're delivering software applications, either in kind of a SaaS format or inside the enterprise. They may be delivering to internal stakeholders with an internal application. And their primary reason for existing is to deliver that application functionality out to a multi-stakeholder group. And that final piece is that their constituency, the people consuming those applications, those data sources that are at the edge, those users are at the edge of the network, they're many, many, many different companies.
Yeah.
Instead of connecting, say, my 20 or 30 branch offices, I'm connecting many, many, many companies together.
Yeah.
So if you draw a box around that sweet spot customer, those are the kinds of customers that can benefit the most.
So let's talk about growth strategies.
Sure.
Like what 2020. And what is a strategy when you're talking about the technology landscape that you've just defined? I mean, it's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very widespread. So how do you gain market share and meet the expectations of your investors and your expectations?
Yeah, that's always a challenge, and obviously we have significant growth goals, and to double in size year over year.
Yeah.
And so that's a well-worn trail, but it can be very, very overwhelming for anyone. So we have a challenge where we have a competitive landscapes with some very, very big companies with a lot of resources. We've got to out-innovate them, and we've got challenges with, like everyone else does, with finding and hiring the right people. But I think the most effective way to compete in that environment has been for us to focus on the work that is right in front of us.
Yeah.
Is just focus on the next block, the next throw, the next tackle, the next line of code, the next customer, the next proposal. One activity at a time. One activity at a time to do that really, really well. It's my kids are competitive swimmers. I never swam. I played some team sports. But in swimming, you're not worried about the person in the lane next to you.
Right.
You're worried about what you can do at that very moment to go faster.
Yeah.
And so that's been really, really helpful for us. We just want to just focus on doing the fundamental things really, really well consistently, and then good things end up happening.
I want to talk a little bit about your leadership style. And literally, I'm going to ask that question, what is your leadership style? But also weave into there, how do you find mentorship and guidance? And sometimes CEOs struggle with that sometimes because they're in the business of making sure everybody else is wound up and aligned. But you yourself need encouragement and feedback as well. So how do you, what's your leadership style with your team? And then where do you go to get mentorships and guidance?
Sure. The leadership is service. And I really don't mean that in a cliche way. It really is. So our leadership style organizationally is recognizing that each of us bring unique skill sets at a management team level, and certainly for every employee in our organization. And those unique skill sets fit together nicely as a puzzle, and they're very, very complementary. Yeah. So we're gonna focus on creating an environment where it's okay for individuals to seize leadership in an area where they have a core competency, and trusting those individuals to do the right thing in that core competency. So we're all going to fit together. Not everybody's a wide receiver, not everybody's a quarterback, not everybody's a running back or a defensive player. We have to create an environment where those skill sets fit together. Yeah. The second piece is not bringing people on board until we have created the conditions for their success. Yeah. So what does that mean? well, let's take an inside business development representative whose job is to do lead generation. We want to create the appropriate amount of marketing support. We want to get a list of highly qualified prospects in place that's large enough for them. We want to really understand our product market fit, and we want to have a lot of those support systems in place. And then we're going to hire somebody who's really, really good at that one skill set and be able to put them in a context where they can be successful
You've
immediately.
empowered them versus putting them on an island.
Most definitely. We've empowered them, and equally importantly, we've equipped them. We're not dropping them on that island without a backpack and water and a tent. We want to make sure they're really, really properly equipped. So from a leadership perspective, we have to serve each other, and that's what we do. And you asked about mentorship, and I'm glad you asked that. You know, I think having a very supportive spouse is critically important.
It does help.
It helps a lot. I'm very, very lucky to have one, and then being able to share that journey and being
that plug's going to get you a lot of feedback. Well, that's a great plug. You got to make sure she watches this.
Well,
okay?
no, I'm definitely going to show her. So she's amazingly supportive, and in that we've got to have people that we can be broken with. Does that make sense?
Elaborate.
Yeah. So we're all human beings, and each day we've got to go out and we've got to execute in so many roles. In my case, as a father and as a husband, those are primary, and then as a business person. But at the end of the day, we've all got our weaknesses, we've all got our challenges. We have to have those individuals we can have those authentic, deep conversations with, where we can say, I don't know what to do here.
Right.
I'm facing a challenge that's extraordinarily difficult.
Making yourself vulnerable to something.
Making yourself vulnerable. So someone to be broken with. In many cases, that's a spouse, and that's valuable. But I think a group of other people that are close friends, especially that are going through the same professional challenges, I'd highly advise that for anybody. And allow yourself to be vulnerable and go deep with that. Yeah. And then finally, I've been fortunate enough to have mentors who were significantly older than me and had a lot more experience in the business world, who were able to plow the path that I could call at any time of the day or night and say, what do I do here? What do I do in this circumstance? And they're able to offer that clarity. Yeah. So those are those three things I think are really important.
Well, as we wrap up, tell us what one of your big milestones is for the balance of the year. Just pick one.
Yeah.
I'm sure you got a couple, but what's a big milestone that if you achieve it, 2019 without a doubt is a success?
Yeah. Now we've got a couple of big ones, and I think there's sort of a the kind of standard revenue goal. We're going to double in size in revenue, and that really means 3 to 4 larger customers. Our customers tend to be larger, and closing that in the coming year. But I think getting there means executing, as I said, on the fundamentals.
Absolutely.
And so that big milestone is how well do we execute on the strategic pillars of our business: high security, high availability, reliability, and performance, and getting the outcomes that our current customers expect. Because if we do those things really, really, really well, we're going to be able to project that to outcomes for those new customers.
Yeah, the revenue takes care of itself.
Revenue takes care of itself, and when you're speaking to a customer in that wheelhouse, you're obviously projecting credibility because you're already doing it very well for another person, so there's going to be relationships of trust. And the final thing I think I'll say is a big milestone is we're in a relationship business. All of it is about relationships. Our customers are long-term. They trust us with some of the most secure assets that they have, and we've got to do a good job 100% of the time. So building those relationships with our existing customers and solidifying them, and then building those new relationships with these new customers that's just of inestimable value.
All gets back to the people.
All gets back to people.
Well, thank you so much. We wish you the best of luck. Thanks for being here.
Thank you,
and
Ted.
we'll talk soon.
All right, my
All
pleasure.
right, take care. Thanks.